Welcome and good evening. My name is Jean Friedman. I'm the Director of Planning for Peekskill. And before we get started, I'd like to recognize a few people in the audience. We have Kathy Talbot from the City Council, and we have quite a few members from our Waterfront Committee that is heading up this plan, working with the consultant and with staff. They've been meeting on a regular basis to review the comments that are coming in from the public and helping the consultants out with local information, etc. They've been great on this committee, and we appreciate their help. So tonight we are going, this is the second workshop. We had the first workshop at the end of March, and many of you came to that and provided excellent input and feedback into the process. And the consultants have taken that information and incorporated it into the list of projects that we have and the maps that you're going to see tonight. And this is still in draft form, certainly, and now we want to get a second round of opinion based on what we've come up with. So tonight's another time for you to give your input and to see the plan take shape. So basically the consultants will be presenting this to you, and then we will be breaking again into roundtables so you can focus on different areas, whatever area you're interested in, and we'll be taking notes and going back and further refining the draft, and they'll be working during the summer on the draft, and then in the fall we'll present the draft plan to the council and go on from there to produce a final. So without further ado, I'll introduce Frank Fish from Buckhurst BFJ Consulting, and we'll get going. Thank you.
Thank you, Jean. We're just going to share this presentation. I'm going to give an introduction. Susan Favati from our office is going to go through the projects we've sort of gone over with our committee. And then Simon's going to go through at the end how we'd like to get responses back from everyone. So with that, here's what we hope to do tonight. We're going to go through sort of the presentation, overview of the process, and particularly Susan's going to go through the project ideas, so many of which came from you in the first workshop and also from the existing plan and the committee's review of it. And then we're hoping that we could divide into sort of 3 tables at the end by geographic area this time of the waterfront. And then listen to you all from the tables and reporting back and going over next steps. So that's what we're hoping to do. I think most of the Waterfront Advisory Committee is here, so we're hoping that they'll split themselves up into the tables afterward also. And then I think you know our team, BFJ Planning. We've been assisted by McLaren Engineers on waterfront issues, and then by an economic group, Urbanomics, where there's a market or economic question, and the PACO group has been looking at water sewer capacities to support projects on the waterfront. Just in terms of the overview, this is one slide that those of you who were at the last work session, you may remember. But for those of you, we put this in for those of you who are new tonight, just to mention what is the LWRP, what is a local waterfront revitalization plan. I think it's very important, even though this is funded by the state, and Jean and we just met with the state representative from the Department of State, from DOS, that this is a locally prepared plan. That in terms of the state's view, they're very interested in reporting procedures, and that this is technically done right, and the accounting's done on it well, and that we respect their overall policies, but that it's locally prepared. So it's your plan. And they generally don't get involved in the details of it, although we're obligated, when we finish this, as Jane said, in the summer, to send it to them. So they're going to review it, and they're going to obviously have comments on it. So it's an organizational structure. If we propose any local laws or zoning, those have to be in it. We propose projects or land uses, those have to be in it also. But one thing importantly, we mentioned this before, it does give you the ability, there's some positives in it for controlling state and federal actions. They're supposed to, and DOS is responsible for this, they're supposed to conform their actions, if you will, to the LWRP. So from that point of view, it's an important document at the state level. And it hasn't been updated since 2004. Quite a bit's changed. Sandy was one thing that has happened since that time that comes to mind. So we're trying to provide that update and provide an update on projects that you'll see. Susan's going to go over and explain those. So we hope this is being done at an appropriate moment. If it's adopted by the council, it sets the stage for funding applications to DOS for following through on the projects that are capital projects. And just in terms of the timeline, many of you attended in March our first public workshop on this. And at that time, as you know, we were trying to test out goals and objectives, overall strategies for the LWRP. We've done that, and now we're testing tonight, at tonight's meeting, actual land use suggestions and projects to get your input on them. And then what we hope to do is, over the summer, you can see some of this, I hope, right in here. We hope to follow up and complete these sections and then work on what's called the environmental assessment forms. The City Council has to make a determination here as to whether this has environmental impacts that are adverse or beneficial, basically. And the council alone can do that as the elected official. So when we get the draft done here over the summer, it's going to go to our committee, and it's also going to go to the City Council. So the City Council just has to here both declare what it's called, declare itself in charge of the environmental process. It's kind of a formality. They're the only ones who can do that. And then they need to set a public hearing on the draft plan. Still be a draft, but everybody will have a chance to see it, read it, and then comment on the draft. And then we'll have to meet after that again with our committee, these blue squares with the committee, and then finally make revisions. And then again, only council, only the elected official can adopt it. So we're hoping by the end of the year, early December, perhaps the council might be in a position to adopt it. I want to say might because Department of State has technically, from when they get the draft, they have about according to regulation, they have 60 days to review it. Sometimes they've been known to be late. So if they are, we sort of have to wait for their comments. They've been briefed on this. Jean has briefed them. So hopefully we will get the comments, and then council would be able at the end of the year to act on it. That's the timeline anyway that we're working under. So since our first workshop, we've developed these projects that we mentioned. We've been revising the LWRP policies, although most of the policies will remain generally the same. We're trying to simplify a little bit. Again, we've met with city staff. We've had our engineers meet with the city engineers on this. And we've briefed the Peekskill, we've briefed the council on where we were going with this. The council had some input. You'll see some of that reflected tonight. And then we will brief the council again after we meet with the committee and when we do the draft. So hopefully for us, the summer, it's vacation period, but for us also it's actually writing the draft to get it done by sometime in August. And so that's our hope. I just wanted to mention all of those of you who were at the first workshop. The boundary remains the same as the existing LWRP boundary. Changing a boundary can be done, but we have to have real reasons to do that with DOS, and I think staff did not point out any need to change the boundaries, and that, as you know, came up in the first workshop. So these are the boundaries where We're running with, by the way, most of the, this is Hudson River in blue, but it's really the whole shoreline from Mansville Creek all the way down. So that it's really the shoreline. The one place that comes out a little bit is up Central Avenue. So that's the overall boundary. And then what we wanted to do tonight was focus on these projects, and I'm going to turn this over to Susan Favati to go through those.
Thanks, Frank. So one of the key focuses of the LWRP document and the focus of tonight's meeting, and certainly one of the more fun aspects, we think, is what are the projects that the city would like to support that would implement the policies, the goals, the objectives of the waterfront area and the community's vision for that area. And the reason that these projects are important is primarily, one of the biggest reasons is that they are effective in getting money from the state, from the Department of State. And they have been very effective from your 2004 LWRP in getting some funds and some grant money for improvements down at the water. I think most of you probably are aware of these improvements. The Peekskill Landing, park improvements, the Lincoln Depot Museum, it's underway, some trail improvements. And then in terms of private development, the Riverbend development was actually something that was touched on in the 2004 document. So these can be city organized public efforts, or they can be private efforts that the city would like to support. Most of them are actual construction projects, but some of them might be programmatic. It can really run a wide gamut. So that's what we're going to really get into tonight. We have separated, consistent with the 2004 plan, we've separated the overall LWRP area into several key planning areas. So the southern planning area is generally south of Louisa Street along the southern portion of the waterfront, along the Hudson. And these are just a general list of the projects which we'll get into. And one of the key focuses of these projects really is to try to balance the uses that are there now, which are some of the city's greatest job creators, with the opportunities that arise from a lot of vacant land, a lot of city-owned and city-controlled land, and to try to balance those aspects. So support the businesses that are there, but look at opportunities for redevelopment and reuse of vacant and underutilized land. So in terms of projects that are focused more on redevelopment and the zoning that might affect that, we've discussed a lot with the committee and with city staff is looking at some different zoning for the bulk of this southern waterfront area. So generally south of Louisa Street, trying to create a new zone that supports what's there in terms of the light industrial uses that are there right now, and many of which are doing quite well, but also allow a variety of new uses to come in. Commercial, largely in nature, but more of a different type of commercial than what you might find in downtown or on the waterfront. So trying to recognize that what the city would like here, we think is something of a different animal than the commercial area that's in your central business district or that's happening along the waterfront. More of a destination for people from out of town. And so that might also include some retail and some entertainment-focused uses, as well as the light industrial uses that are there now, and some office uses as well. Another site that is a great opportunity, we think, is right here where I'm pointing. This is the current city DPW facility, which has been noted in various plans in the past 10 or so years that it would be ideal if the DPW facility were to relocate somewhere else in the city, free up this site for something that makes a better use of its location near the waterfront and some of these excellent roadways. So what we are suggesting with the committee and the city staff is looking at some new zoning for this DPW site, assuming that it can be relocated, that would allow a little bit of a higher, somewhat more dense residential focused development. I think we're not suggesting commercial development here. We're suggesting that the commercial development really belongs sort of down here, south of Louisa Street, but that this site would be a good transition from that type of development north to some of the residential uses that are already present right around here. So that's just some concepts for the southern planning area. And then to support those concepts, we've identified some infrastructure improvements that we think are needed down here. And one is South Street itself, Lower South Street. You can see here, varies in condition, but a lot of it is fairly poor in condition. The pavement itself is not in great shape. It could use some sidewalks, it could use some possible utility improvements, lighting. All of these things we think would improve the viability of this area, both for its current development and future development. And ideally, a lot of these improvements could happen in tandem with redevelopment. Looking at the actual water side of this area, the city already has plans to extend the Southern Trailway all the way down to Lentz Cove. Some aspects of that are funded, and some of them still need funding. So that would be something that we could identify, and then the city could go after state funding to complete that effort. And similarly, there are some dredging needs that we've identified down there at Charles Point Marina. There are some things happening in terms of the land side, but there are things that the city could look to do with possible funding to improve the water side and make that more viable. And then finally, Fleischman Pier, which was our introductory slide, there is a grant that the city has received to conduct a study of the future use of that pier and what kind of upgrades are needed to support fishing and docking of certain vessels. It still requires a city match, so we're just putting this in here as something that the city will need to ensure funding for. So that is the southern planning area. This is the central planning area, which has a very long list, and we'll try to go briefly through these. This was identified in the opening workshop as really the centerpiece of the Peekskill Waterfront. It's what people, I think, felt the strongest about. They identified that as what they think of when they think of Peekskill Waterfront. So it's the entire central portion of the waterfront as well as Central Avenue up to the downtown area. And Central Avenue has been identified in your current LWRP as well as previous plans as really the link, the key link between downtown and the waterfront. And so some of these projects are trying to further that. So I'll just go through them quickly. In terms of potential development, we are looking at the current WF2 zoning, which is one of your two waterfront zones, allowing a slightly higher height. Right now it's 3 stories and you can go up to 4 with a bonus. We're suggesting 4 stories, bonus to 5. So a little slight height, but nothing terribly significant that would change the character, because that is something that we heard a lot at the first workshop, is people wanted to balance the existing waterfront maritime historic character, but also to try to capitalize on opportunities to continue some of the momentum that's happening down there. So most of the area would be 4 to 5. There are select areas where the city might explore higher heights, maybe 6 to 8 stories, if it's something that's next to Route 9 that essentially would not be impacting views. So that's something that the city could explore. And one area that we have identified as a potential area for somewhat higher height is right here. It's currently the On Peak House, which is a social services facility. It sort of hugs a rock face right here, kind of underneath Route 9. So it's not visible for the most part from upland areas of the city. And we think it's ideal for a little bit higher height, primarily residential. There is interest by the owner of the property in doing something here, redeveloping it. So we think that that might be something that the city could consider. There's another site, which maybe I'll go back and show you here. This site here in yellow. It's a city-owned parcel just south of the Peekskill Yacht Club. It's vacant. And right now it's zoned WF1, which means that it could allow a hotel, or if they got a special permit, it could allow a restaurant or a marina type use. And we're suggesting, I'm not changing the uses that would be allowed, so basically what's allowed today, but trying to facilitate some sort of development on that site, because it is a prime riverfront site that the city owns, which is a great opportunity. And then the last aspect here in the central planning area is looking at the waterfront zoning design guidelines, which have been designed, I think they're about 10 years old. There are some issues, we think, with these design guidelines. One of the biggest is that they seem to require pitched roofs, which are more consistent with a single-family type house, and not really consistent with what you actually already have down there, which is a lot of flat roofs, which goes along with your maritime history, 3- and 4-story buildings with flat roofs. So that's one area that we think we can look at in terms of promoting the type of design that reinforces that character and also promotes adaptive reuse of some of those buildings and new construction that is consistent with those. Looking at infrastructure improvements, this is something, the first item that's I think been in various studies for some time, is a pedestrian crossing of the Metro North rail tracks to try to improve overall pedestrian circulation. This would be generally in the vicinity of the Main Street, Water Street intersection. There are still, despite a lot of improvements to the parks down on the waterfront, there are still some identified improvements to Riverfront Green from prior plans, and those are the things that the city could go after some funding for in terms of controlling erosion on the shoreline, looking at possible dredging needs that may be necessary, possible amenities like improvements for swimming, looking at possible boat rentals, non-motorized boats. And going along with this development site that we were talking about in the last slide here, where the Jan Peak House is, this is something that was also in a prior plan, and we're suggesting that one of the biggest concerns with this site and one of the biggest impediments to trying to reuse it in a viable way is the location of Old Piedmont Avenue, which basically hugs the rock face here. And you have a very narrow area where the current building is between the rock face and the Metro North tracks. And we're suggesting that if you realign the roadway so that it more hugs the tracks, you actually have a more viable site here, that you might see something happen. So we're suggesting that's something that the city might want to look at. And then in more of a programmatic type project, just continuing to encourage MTA to look at some viable reuses of the building itself, the train station building itself, for perhaps a restaurant or a similar type of use that would activate that area. Now, another key goal of this LWRP draft, as well as prior drafts, is trying to activate Central Avenue and make sure that it's connecting the waterfront and the downtown and is your viable link here. So one of the most important things that we think could do that is to allow some targeted development of underutilized and vacant sites. There are some strong uses there that are doing well, but there are other areas that are kind of vacant, and they limit some of the street life that happens. So we think the city can try to facilitate that type of targeted development. And then looking at the pedestrian, the walker who's making that trek up from the river, trying to improve that overall experience, to induce them to make that walk, looking at better lighting, better sidewalk treatment, signage that helps direct them to various points in the city, figuring out the best and ideal bike route for people trying to make that trek from, I shouldn't keep calling it a trek, a stroll from the train station up to downtown, having a kiosk at the train station. This was something we actually heard at the first workshop. Trying to get those people who might be coming up from the city and might be unfamiliar with Peekskill, directing them to where they can go and all the opportunities that are here for them. And there is this, I don't know how many of you are aware of this, there's a stairway right now that we think is actually city-owned that connects Central Avenue to South Street. It's kind of interesting. A little bit overgrown, maybe needs a little bit of repair work. Could help to improve some of the overall circulation, give people another option to get down to Central Avenue. And then finally, this is something we heard a lot at the first workshop too, is McGregory Brook, which runs sort of behind Central Avenue. We heard a lot of interest in improving that and opening it up to the public. And the good thing here is that a lot of the land around McGregory Brook is city-owned. So there's already opportunity to enhance public access and to open that up a little bit. Where it's not city-owned, we think that the city can coordinate with some of those private property owners to secure some easements and to just try to improve the access there, and because it is a great amenity, we think. And parking is going to be a significant issue currently, as well as with any future development. So we've talked a lot with the committee about what are the options that the city has, and one of the areas that we think is low-hanging fruit is the paved area under Route 9, which currently is used for snow storage by the city. We think this could fairly simply be converted into a surface parking lot. You'd clearly have to coordinate with DOT on this, but that you could get a decent amount of spaces here which would serve visitors and shoppers to the waterfront, visitors to the Lincoln Depot Museum, for example. And then in terms of capturing the commuter parking and addressing that need, we think longer term, we're suggesting, this is not a new idea, I think it's been in prior plans, that the ideal location for commuter-focused parking structure is along the southern area. Here's a picture of it, of the central planning area at the Railroad Avenue site. And we think that this could be done in a way that does not affect views from upland areas, and that allows for some pretty good circulation from the existing streets. And we think it would be an attractive use for people who would like to park at there and go to the train station. And then trying to look at parking that also supports future and current retail uses. Ideally, a lot of the stores would like to have some on-street parking down here at the waterfront. And one area that we think is an opportunity for that is the area of South Water Street, not the entire length, but basically between Homestyle Desserts, which if you're familiar with the bakery, it's right up at the road. So you clearly can't do much right there. But south of there, we think there's some room to gain some on-street parking spaces through a little bit of reconfiguration, which would support businesses along that stretch of Water Street, particularly in some of the parking lot areas that might become reused. So that was a quick speed through. We're going to spend some more time after the presentation looking at these. But then the final planning area that we'd like to talk about is actually combined to the northern planning area and then the Ansville Creek going up to the creek, and go through these real quick. There's sort of two general areas that these projects fall into. And the first one, in terms of redevelopment, there are really two sites that we think are good candidates. And one of these is 9 Corporate Drive, which is a city-owned property. Here it is right here, former landfill site. And there are developers out there that there is some interest, and we're suggesting just continue to facilitate an appropriate redevelopment of that site. It does need a little bit of cleanup, but it really is a prime site. And then this is something we also heard at the first workshop. There's the old St. Mary's property. Check if I can find this. Beautiful, beautiful building, beautiful bluff. People were they had a lot of pride in this particular site. You can see it so visibly from the waterfront. However, it's falling into disrepair year after year. And there are plans from a developer to reuse this building in conjunction with some new residential, but to reuse it for some interesting uses, a combination of uses that would preserve this wonderful building. And part of that redevelopment plan is to transfer some of the acreage associated with the St. Mary's property to Fort Hill Park as public space. So we're suggesting that the city support that redevelopment because it's a great opportunity to both preserve that building and get some quality development in the process. The other aspect of the Ansville Creek Northern Planning Area is open space. And you currently have this wonderful trail network, the Ansville Creek Trail, which sort of stops at the Yon Peak Bridge. And so we've identified kind of a process here to enhance that trail and improve it. And the first bullet point here, which we think, there we go, sorry. Again, low-hanging fruit, and it's not something that you directly control, but getting the town of Cortland to make the connection between their side of the Yon Peak Bridge and the Paddle Sports Center, which we understand that they have plans to do, but they haven't followed through with that yet. So essentially working with the town to ensure that happens, that is really the missing link here. Then on your side of the bridge, continuing to work with the property owners along Corporate Drive to secure easements and build the trail along Highland Avenue, which would connect that end of the trail. And then this last bullet, the third bullet I should say, is a little bit of an uncertainty here. The elephant in the room here is the sewage treatment plant down here. And that's always a question of how much cooperation you're going to get from Westchester County. But we think that it's a conversation that the city needs to have, that there may be a way to not get a trail along the water side of the sewage treatment plant, but perhaps come behind the building through an easement just to get around it, essentially. And if that could happen, then we're suggesting the final piece here is to make that connection from the sewage treatment plant to the Route 9 bridge, so that then you would have a full length of the Ansville Creek Trail. And I skipped over this first bullet, which is important, we think, that goes along with the prior slide, with the transfer of acres to open space in Fort Hill Park. The city really should undertake a master plan for Fort Hill Park. There are wonderful aspects of the park, historic, we understand, historic Revolutionary War structures. However, a lot of it's underutilized. It's not terribly accessible to the public. And with this influx of open land, it's really an opportunity for the city to figure out what's the best way to proceed with Fort Hill Park. So that was a very quick overview, and now I'll hand it to Simon to talk about what happens next.
All right, thanks, Susan. I'm going to be very brief just to set us up for the roundtable section of the evening. We've got the project split up into 3 different groupings. Over here is the southern planning area that Susan introduced first. There in the back is central planning area projects. And then to your right is the northern and Ansville Creek planning areas. Those are the stations that are listed up here. As we break up into smaller groups, the really key thing to understand is that the projects that Susan just introduced and that we're going to talk about are not set in stone. We're really here to get additional feedback. We want to talk about whether the list that we have is complete. Are there details to the projects that are maybe not perfect, and make sure that we're not missing anything. And Susan went through a lot of the details in her slides, but you'll see around the room we have maps that show the location of all of these projects, and there are also these boards alongside that have additional details about each of the projects. So that's where you'll see and you'll talk about in these small groups. They're more than just their title. There are also some, sort of an outline of what they would entail. And if we're missing something, that's where we want to hear additional information. There are also these large notepads where we'll ask one of you to volunteer to take notes to make sure that as these conversations are going along, we record everything that's said, so that when we put together a summary and look towards producing the draft plan, we know that we've got all the information that came out of this meeting and we can draw from it. I'll also point out that at all of the tables there's a copy of this presentation in case you have any questions or want to refer to it. There's also a copy of the meeting summary from the last public workshop if you've got questions about what came out of that, whether you were there and want to make sure that your idea was recorded, or if you weren't there and want to see what was discussed. And just in terms of next steps, after tonight, the committee is going to meet, I think next week, and we'll talk with them about sort of what the takeaways were and what changes we need to make going forward, and we'll take that and use that towards producing the draft plan. And just the last slide here is we want to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to see the summary that we produced from this. It will be posted on the city's LWRP website. It's a long URL. We'll leave this up for a little while so you can write it down. And if you've got any questions that you want to email directly to Jean, her email is up here as well. Now, as we break up into groups, I think that we're anticipating a bigger crowd at the central planning area. There are more projects there, and it's really right in the center of the waterfront. So we'll have a little more space in the back of the room. But I'll just point out that as we break up into these other 2 tables, if they are smaller groups, we want to talk about the projects in the southern planning area, but it's okay if we veer off into the central planning area. We're not going to break off conversation. So pick a group, but know that you're not going to be restricted from talking about anything that was really presented here. And so with that, I think we'll take a couple of minutes. We might need to move some tables around. And we'll get ready for the roundtable session.
The first area of discussion for the central area was the conversation centered around rephrasing the height allowances for the buildings, saying to developers that if they are going to get bonuses of extra height, they had to do things like build green. The conversation came up a little later that they had to perhaps pay into an infrastructure fund. So that the builder wasn't going to just, or the developer wasn't just going to be able to be given extra height. He had to do work for us. We were in the position of power to control what they were going to be able to do. Paths close to the river need to be walkable, that there should be no bike riding on them. The big conversation about daylighting of McGregory Brook, it involves realigning utilities at the base of Central Avenue, realigning businesses, and actually, and also realigning Central Avenue is extremely expensive, and it's most likely not going to happen. The retail parking on the bottom of parking garages, the garage that was proposed is the one that would be built on Railroad Avenue where the old Sorrento's restaurant used to be. The idea is that if there's going to be that the top of it would not be residential, it would be for cars only, and that there perhaps could be a green roof on the top, especially keeping in mind the people who are living above it, even though it's built into the hill and it's going to be no higher than South Street. The people that are above it, they were questioning, you know, like, are they going to be looking down on top of seeing cars? So that has to be discussed. The idea of maintenance of new trails at the riverfront along with the Peekskill Landing, and that maintenance doesn't do itself, that maintenance has to be considered as a cost when things are being created, and, you know, discussion about that there's trees that were planted last year that are, you know, didn't survive the winter, and who's going to pay to take care of that. The secondary cost of all those things of like fire, police, and DPW when there's new development and brings people to the city, that there's all these other costs that are, you know, not just necessarily the buildings. Let's see, floodplain in the area of water. Oh, the discussion about the floodplain, the buildings that are going up along Water Street, that there's a whole, you know, section that the buildings have to be able to meet the FEMA mapping plans and the cost involved in flooding, which is most likely going to happen. That has to be factored in. Okay, Central Avenue residential development using retail as well as residential, so that people would want to be walking along Central Avenue and being able to give people some place that is attractive for them to walk from the riverfront up to the downtown. Pedestrian bridge off Main Street was discussed. Do we need it? Who pays for it? And then that led into a conversation about, you know, like the safety issues for people who are on the other side of the pedestrian bridge on the side by the river, and how do emergency vehicles get there if there's only one place for them to get to it from where the railroad crossing is now. And then prioritizing a checklist of things that are in progress and what are the areas that the city really wants to, what are the projects that the city really wants to go after, and prioritize what is, like, you know, is a pedestrian bridge not as important as, you know, like things that are going to be working in the flood zone. And then the final conversation was about the athletic fields. There was a question about that there's not open parcels, or if there are very limited open parcels, can they be perhaps used for soccer games and other athletic fields? We didn't really get into a very big conversation about that because the time had ended. Anybody else? Did I forget anything? Good job.
By the way, it was terrific discussion for us too, listening that, you know, this idea of setting priorities, and quite frankly, until someone raised the pedestrian bridge, I was kind of taking it for granted. I thought it was a great idea, but you know, the question is, where is that on the priority list? And it's probably there, but it might not be first. That's what came out of that. And this was a very good kind of for us to hear. But how about the southern planning areas? Is there someone speaking to? Great. I'll move this. This is yours, right? Yeah. I'm just going to move it here. And you got to use
We started.
I'll move that one. I'll move that one closer.
Thanks. We started with the Travis Point area. We noted the waterfront trails will be open at the end of the summer. The road to the yacht club is being already planned to be improved. New private development in that area would improve the entire site. Maybe a restaurant could be opened on the site, and a trail will be completed further down into the site. On the Charles Point area, it's being developed by Diamond Property. Did I get that right? I think. Okay. We're wondering about the marina, whether it can be dredged, and it would be a combination city-private developer combination. Again, can we put a new restaurant down in that area? And right now it's a long-term lease from the city. The Lentz Cove area is private land. It's great bird watching. The trail, I have no idea what that says, and I wrote it. Goes through the easement on Bertolini. Okay. Could there be a kayak launch at that site? And we have to be aware that there are wetlands at the creek mouth. For the relocated DPW site, why are we putting residential there? We sort of went through a big discussion on that. Could DPW move to the 9 Corporate Drive site? That site actually connects with the proposed rezoning of the lighter industrial area on the other side of Louisa Street. Is that correct? Mixed use on that in the relocated DPW site. I think we could have mixed use on the first 2 stories and residential above. Provide the zone for mixed use to create a transition between the recreational area to the north and the sort of light industrial to the south. Fleischman's Pier, is it possible to dredge it for larger boats? Someone noted that they think that there's a hazard out in the water, an old pipe associated with the Fleischman's plant. I think it's the only opportunity for larger boats to come into the area. We got a little bit into the riverfront green. Oh no, City Dock already has a shallow channel there, but dredging may be possible to make it more accessible. The riverfront green area, we're wondering if there's any contamination out in the river. There was someone had heard something that there might be contamination. On the BASF vacant property lot, I have nothing. Lower South Street Road needs to be widened in places. New streetscape can go in, but would be financed by developers. And the entrance from Buchanan, is it possible to move from the train tracks to South Street? Is it possible to move the road closer to the trains? We would have to negotiate with Metro North in order to do that. Plans exist for South Street realignment already. The profile of the street is currently poor, and it's possible, I think that the plan proposed to move it onto the BASF site and take advantage of the topography. Rezoning that area, that entire area east of the tracks, would encourage development. Some things that people were okay with, or some possible models were, Trader Joe's, movie theater, Nanuet Mall, which is sort of a walkable village, and Ridge Hill and Yonkers. We're wondering if there's a limit if we can put a limit under the zoning on the square foot of new businesses. Louisa Street exit on off of the highway, and we're wondering if it can handle larger amounts of traffic if retail goes into this site. It's already tenuous. Shared parking, if we can, depending on what goes in, manage development to stagger use patterns. So during the day it's office, at night restaurants. Scale of development, we don't want big box, smaller walkable sites, but we're still, we still talked about movie theaters, which are still large buildings, 50,000 square feet. Stormwater regulations affect the development on the site. We can't use old techniques, and so stormwater management, infiltrating water in the ground is going to affect actual footprints of buildings. We like the idea that in the revised design guidelines, transitioning to flat roofs encourages green roof use. Redeveloping the street impacts the infrastructure underneath. I think we were talking about South Street there. All of that infrastructure needs to be upgraded if development is going to happen. The sewer pump station needs work, that's supposed to say not world, on Louisa Street. The pipes in the area are a mystery. We don't know apparently the city does not have a clear idea as to what's happening with the pipes. Power issues, we're wondering with all the additional development, can solar energy be used to help mitigate additional power requirements? Bonus, when we're talking 6 to 8 stories, the higher stories can be done only with, in the case of they're getting a bonus, can the bonus be green infrastructure? Can we require energy neutral development in the new zoning area since we're rezoning that? Can we rewrite that to include energy neutral development? We don't want more residential in the new zoning area. Another idea that came up for this number 2 site, the DPW site, is a vertical Chelsea Piers. And that's it.
I wrote really big and not quite at length, but big points, I think.
Okay, you're the last speaker.
Good, so we can all get at it, we can all go soon. I'll make this short. We talked about the path along the wastewater treatment section where now it's outlined to go inland. If there's a possibility to bring that out, obviously there's cost involved there, but good idea was raised that has been seen elsewhere to utilize that as a learning opportunity for the public to what's happening at our wastewater treatment plant, and it can be, exactly what the process is, and it can be a learning experience for the general public. The pedestrian bridge is seen as an important point at the north end of the landing to connect the whole trail without any backtrack. Is it possible to leave Fort Hill Park natural and rustic while a lot of this development is becoming harder surfaces? Possibly, can this area be left more natural and less hard surfaces, and less trail marking, maybe possibly even that. Are there alternative sites for the DPW and the shelter? There is a lot of talk about the access through that block and the narrowness, and also discussed the idea of sports complex or soccer fields at the 9 Corporate Drive site. The Ansville Preserve Road, that one-way road that runs between the rail line and the cliff, it was brought up, does that have to be vehicular traffic all the time, 100% for the public? Or can it be restricted to emergency access or MTA vehicles only with pedestrian traffic otherwise, because of it's so tight now? And if we're going to increase the usage of that with bicycles and pedestrians, is there enough room there to safely and pleasurably enjoy that road and access those sites? Again, the better access and the width of the trail near the shelter. Then the idea of creating alternative office spaces versus the traditional office parks that are corporate parks, the sort of cookie cutter approach to office space. Can there be something else done to flush that out and make it unique here, a unique office space in Peekskill? Is it possible to incorporate this waterfront trail with a connection to the Blue Mountain Preserve? There's a great facility there. It would be a short spur, maybe just some wayfinding and a dedicated bike lane to bring a huge attraction of people who spend a lot of time cycling in the Blue Mountain Preserve and bring them down into the city of Peekskill before or after their activities. And then as far as more wayfinding and informational for out-of-towners, particularly with a kiosk and volunteer manning, actually personally manned at the train station, more than just a pin board, someone there to answer questions, point people in the right direction, and get orienteering straightened out right there at the station.
With that, thank you all, and we'll write up this meeting, and again, comments should go through Jean. Thank you.